Live streaming is on.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to give you more about Oliver Twist. And the topic that I'm going to tell you this afternoon is called the Oliver Twist theme. And the meaning in Khmer language, uh, theme it means ផ្ទៃរឿងខ្លឹមសារក៏ដូចជាឆ្អឹងនៃរឿង Yeah. The first one is called institutional cruelty. Yeah. Cruelty of the institutions and bureaucracy toward the unfortunate is perhaps the preeminent themes of Oliver and essentially what makes it a social novel. Dickens wrote the book largely in response to the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834, which represented the government's both passive and active cruelty to the poor and helpless. All those institutions saw both passive and active cruelty in Oliver Twist. Active cruelty is more prevalent, a move that serves to exaggerate and thus satirize this cruelty and make it seem intentional. The cruelty of this institution, however, is not separated from cruelty of individuals, although the parochial board that decides Oliver's future carelessly and without sympathy is largely anonymous. The man in the white jacket generally voices the specific cruel sentiment so that they are not presented as having come from nowhere or just from law, but from the individual in power. Similarly, Mr. Bumble is often directly involved in the institutional unkindness that Oliver faces. The cruelty is not nameless or faceless. It's just so prevalent that not all the perpetrators can be named. Mob mentality. The horrifying powers of mob mentality is also an important thing in Oliver Twist, and one that is closely related to that of institutional cruelty. Institutional cruelty can be seen to be an example of a specific kind of mob mentality, not literally, but a mob in which individuals are not held accountable for their actions and can be seen as helpless as they like, with the blank face of the bureaucracy to cover them. Similarly, the mob in Oliver Twist all take on life of their own so that the individual within them can be display their cruelest character. We see mob act against Oliver, the most striking example of which is when he is accused of stealing Mr. Bumble's handkerchief. We also see mobs act against the antagonists in the novel. Bill Sikes becomes a victim of a mob, and although we know that he is guilty as opposed to Oliver, there is still an eerie similarity between Sykes' mob and Oliver's that reminds us how easily such a mob can turn against anyone, whether or not that someone is truly cruel or guilty. Thus, even when the mob is on the side of justice and is correct, they can eliminate the dangers of the mentality. The importance of upbringing. Proper upbringing, posited as essential throughout the novel, is illuminated based in the scene where Nancy and Rose first meet. In this scene, the king juxtaposes the prostitute Nancy to angelic and utterly perfect Rose. Nancy's potential for goodness is clear, made so by her very presence there among other things. But from youth she has been surrounded by liars and thieves, and although she transcends their rank morally, she cannot escape from them, nor become the person she could have had she had any of the advantage that Rose did. Rose too comes from the rather anonymous background, but from an early age she was raised by a kind and loving Mrs. Melly, who also offered her the resources she could desire, and she became an example of perfect female. Oliver managed to rise above his upbringing, surrounded by selfish, ignorant, and cruel people for most of his childhood. Given no love, care, or tenderness, he still managed to maintain his kind disposition and never give into the low morals of those around him. He is, however, meant to be the exception that proves the rule. The fact that his happy ending is so very miraculous proof how important it is to be loved and cared for in childhood. The public of children. Dickens is deeply interested in the plight of the public in Oliver Twist. And children are primarily symbol of this. However, Oliver is continuously reliant on and overpowered by others. Mr. Bumble, Fagin, and Sai, the mob and people in the street, even Nancy, although he worked hard to survive, it is only because he is taken in by wealthy and powerful adults that he is able to escape the immoral and dangerous world into which he is born. This powerless is not just represented in Oliver being physically overtaken or forced into things, but in his constant failure to communicate with others. Until he meets Mr. Brownlow, the adult who had total control of Oliver in his life, seemed to fail completely to understand him. This is exemplified in the courtroom scene, where Oliver loses his ability to speak and is given a name arbitrarily but there are countless examples of adults either ignoring or misunderstanding what seems to be clear and direct statement. This powerlessness, however, is not insurmountable as one. Oliver has kind and intelligent people who are willing to listen to him. He gains agency. The powerless of women. Like children, women too are presented as at the mercy of more powerful in society. This is especially exemplified in Nancy, who ends up giving her life in her attempt to act against the men who hold power over her. When Nancy is put in charge of taking Oliver to psych, she tells him that she would help him if she could, but she doesn't have the power. This ends up not being completely true. She does help Oliver in going to Rose, but even then, Rose must turn to Mr. Brownlow and Dr. Losband to accomplish anything. It is telling to consider that Nancy must give her life for just this small show of agency. The limits of justice. Justice and its various forms are very important in Oliver Twist. By the end of the novel, almost all of the characters have faced justice. In one way or another, Mr. and Mrs. Bumble are in a workhouse. Oliver, Rose, and all of good characters live happily and completely, and Sykes and Fagin have both been hanged. Yet Deacon does not seem completely comfortable with the way that justice has been meted out. Although the good characters clearly deserve the happiness they get, and the bad characters certainly have done plenty to deserve their own ends. The novel seems ambivalent about the methods and degrees of justice involved. The reader is already wary of the justice system because of how close Oliver comes to becoming an innocent victim of it. Thus, although within guilt is clear, the courtroom is mobbed in such a way as to make the justice system seem to blend with mob mentality of the audience. This brings up the question of who has right to deliver justice as well as whether any system mere in bureaucracy and relying on human purity should have such extreme powers as that of life and death. City versus countryside. In Oliver Twist, the city and the countryside each take on symbolic meaning and stand in clear dichotomy. The city is corrupt, dirty, and seedy, while the country is pure, clean, and wealthy. It is in the city that Oliver is forced into immorality, while it is in the country that Oliver is able to recover his health, to get an education, to find peace and happiness, and to live morally. Repeatedly, Dickens described the city's parts of London using wholly negative language while in scenes of the country, even in poor, are presented as clean and pleasant to be around. This dichotomy is likely related to danger of the mob mentality that is so prevalent in the novel. In the city where everyone is so close together, it seems to always be the immoral contingent that wins out and drowns out the few moral vices. Just in a mob, voice of reason is always overwhelmed. In the country, conversely, the people are not a mob but a community. Thank you.